I am a former civil servant, investment banker, and I work for an NGO now. So you can understand that I am quite confused in general terms in life. So I prepare a presentation that is going to be very simplistic, okay? And that will try to highlight what I think about what is happening in Spain. So since it will be very simplistic, you can destroy it afterwards during the questions. Can I have one? Okay. So I'm going to go through the Spanish economy as fast as possible through growth, productivity, inflation, balance of payment, public sector debt, and demographics. The first thing is that Spain is an economy that grows more than Europe and more than the USA, particularly and in absolute terms and in relative terms, okay? And particularly during the period 2000-2007. Why Spain does grow more than other countries, particularly during 2000-2007? Basically, for construction, either residential construction or infrastructure, non-residential construction. And there you have some figures for gross capital formation in Spain, up to 11.7% residential construction of GDP, and also relationship with the European Union. And we have grown substantially in both terms. The first thing is infrastructure. Since 1985, we received 180 billion euros from the European Community. The Spanish government put more or less at least another 180 billion. So we have a large boom in infrastructure in the last 15 years or 20 years that has created a much better infrastructure for the Spanish economy. And that has been an important factor in Spain. Some people think that we are starting to have too much infrastructure spent already. The European funds are going to go, and some people think that to continue investing in infrastructure will have a very low efficiency or productivity ratio. Infrastructure has been very good for a sector that has been Spanish construction companies. There you have the situation today in 2008 of Spanish construction companies in Europe. And certainly 20 years ago, that situation wasn't there. It was very different. And also has been very good for construction companies because with the proceeds of the profits, they had gone into the Spanish utility sector. So they had built, and there you have the figures, okay? Again, they have built a very powerful platform for business and also for influencing economic policy. And I think one of the problems that we face is that really when the government decides to spend now, the opinion of the construction companies is very critical. So imagine in 3 seconds in what are we going to spend in the near future. Residential construction. Well, that has been the boom in Spain in the last 9 or 10 years. Just 3 figures, we built almost 600,000 new houses per year as an average in these 10 years. That is 3-4 times the UK. The Spanish household mortgage debt went up from 36% of GDP to 76% of GDP. And immigration, due to this factor, and more of that in a minute, grew by 4.5 million people in 7 years. Of these 4.5 million people, 15% are coming from developed countries. That means we have 2 types of immigration. Which is the reason for this enormous growth in residential terms in Spain? Well, Spain, and I will repeat that 2 or 3 times, is an economy focused on services, labor-intensive services. We had a very important factor during the 60s and 70s, that was tourism. Tourism meaning people that came to Spain to spend 1 month in a hotel or in an apartment. And that has changed through the 80s and 90s and in this century. And that has changed. It has remained that type of tourism, but has been increased by people that are coming here to live, at least 6 months a year. So we are starting to be the Florida of Europe. Okay? And that is the 15% people, immigrants that we have coming from developed countries. And these people do not live in hotels or in apartments. They build in houses basically around the coast. And that has been the critical factor, the starting factor for this residential and construction boom. To build that and to service these people, we needed labor force, and then immigration came in big numbers. And they also needed a house, and they brought families. So the boom feeds again, and we need to build houses inside Spain, particularly in Madrid or Valencia or Barcelona, the big cities. Okay? And on top of that, Spaniards jump happily into the speculation frenzy, and then you get these 600,000 new houses, and you get a very big crisis now. Right? Because we have an enormous amount of empty houses today in Spain, and an inventory that is not desired, that is very large. Second factor of growth in Spain, the financial sector. Well, José Luis explained quite well that we have what I would call a very good regulator, the Bank of Spain. I think that somebody said that that countries have better governments than they deserve. I don't know if that is true, but certainly we have a financial regulator that is well above our institutional framework in this country. So the Bank of Spain is a superb institution, as I said, well above, not comparable to any other, in my opinion, in this country. Under that umbrella, the Spanish banking system has done very well. The 2 major banks in Spain, number 2 and number 3 in Europe, will be basically, it will not change much if we take the world. So the financial sector has been very important for Spain. As well as utilities that had a very good integration, very well financially organized. So that if you take the Spanish index in the Madrid Stock Exchange, in the Spanish Stock Exchange, around 70% is yet Telefónica, utilities, and banks. So if you compare that with Europe, Europe is around 30%, utilities plus banks plus Telefónica. And then we grew also for some, as I say later, high flyers like Telefónica, that is a very big operator now in the world, and for people like Inditex, the textile company, that is also an example for a number of Spanish companies. Well, so much for growth. Productivity. Spain is a low productivity country, as you can see in the chart. Why? First, because our growth comes from construction, that is not particularly a very high productivity sector. Second, because as José Luis said, our universities and our businesses are apart. They live in 2 different worlds. It's not so much that our universities don't do a lot of research. In research, we are in basically the right position in the world, 8 or 9 or 10, is that we don't take that research to our businesses and to our economic life. We don't have the connection that you have in Britain and certainly in the US or even in other European countries. We don't have that. So Spain is a low productivity country, and I don't think that that is going to be solved. The government lately has announced several plans for research and development and has done, let's say, 30% of the plans announced. But I don't think it is of any use until we have the connection. We can do a lot of research, put money into universities, but if it doesn't go to businesses for the country, for the economic life of the country, it's not relevant. Spain is also a high inflation country. Okay? Rigidities, red tape. Red tape has produced an effect because Spain has been a very regulated country traditionally, and is that Spanish companies are very well trained to capture the regulator. Okay? And that happens, and that is one of the things why we are a high inflation country. We have also an economic model that is very much based on services, and as I said, in services that are linked, intensive in labor, and that is not the best way to organize an economy to have a low inflation rate. The balance of payments has been already commented by José Luis. We are in the negative, but nothing different than other European countries, particularly in the south. The only thing is that our position is not due to the government, it's due to the private sector, what could present a different economic policy problem in the future. We have a very sound public sector accounting, and in fact, today we have, in 2007, we had only 36% of the ratio of public sector debt to GDP, what is, as I said, very sound, and which gives a lot of room for the government to spend. And demographics, of course, Spain, well, just to say one thing, in 7 years we grew from 41 million to 45.5 million people. I think that says it all. Okay? We have a serious concern for policy with this. So, in a Spanish economy that is focused on services, labor intense, sound financial sector, some high flyers, what will happen in the next 10 years? In the next 10 years, I think that we will continue with the same economic model. I don't think that is an absurd model for Spain. I think that Spain is basically, our main characteristic is that we are a good country to live in. So it's normal that we have a model that is based in people coming to live to this country. Okay? So I don't think it's going to change a lot. And therefore, I think that we are going to continue to be a high relative growth country. We will continue to be a high inflation country, low productivity, and we will have a substantial increase in population, and that will present, as I say, enormous problems. Okay, the crisis, how it's going to affect Spain. I prepared this yesterday, and I don't know if it is going to work. I hope so. First, which is the question? For me, the question, to explain which is the question, I prepared this vote. Okay? Sailboats sail fairly well, have been sailing for a number of years. Sometimes they crash with a whale, or there is an extremely strong storm and then they sink, but they sail fairly well. Suppose now that we take the sliding keel of the sailing boat, and automatically we increase enormously the size of the sail. A wind comes, what happens? The boat sinks. Okay? Now, call the sailing boat the market system. The sliding keel regulation and the sail leverage. That is basically what we did. Okay? What we did, basically in the United States, is to take off regulation, investment banks and banks increase enormously leverage. The wind came and we sank. The question is, sailboats do not sail well? I don't think so. I don't think that is the question. I don't think that we can ask let us reconsider the market system because it doesn't work well. No, it works well. But one thing is true, it doesn't work well in all conditions. We can create conditions that are disastrous enough for the markets. Anyway, the question is that we have the boat under the water. And then the question is, how do we take the boat out of the water? And there is only one answer, that is spending. There is no other one. Regulation will not take the boat out of the water. Regulation will create a structure that will prevent for the boat to go under the water. But the only way to get out of here is spending. Now, I want to make 2 points on Spain that I think are different than in the rest of the world. Okay? The first point is that the Spanish banking system has a slightly different problem than the US banking system and the UK banking system. We don't have, our banks do not have credit default swaps or derivatives or things like that. Our banks have bricks and houses, or will have bricks and houses, an abundant supply of bricks and houses. Okay? But that is, as a friend of mine says, that is a slow-burning stuff. It's not critical. It will go through profits, and it will go through dividends, and so on and so forth. So we don't have a hurry in our financial system. Will it need money? Yes. For what? In my opinion, for consolidation, particularly the savings institutions. We have a very important part, as probably most of you know, of the financial system, around half that is in the hands of savings institutions. We will see consolidation there in the next 3 or 4 years due to this crisis. The government will have to help with money in that consolidation, that is for sure. On the other hand, in the economy, we have a very different or a more extreme situation than other countries. And that is, we have a serious demographic problem in this country. And that means that our unemployment rate is going up very, very fast. Very fast means that in the next year, probably we will be over 15% unemployment. And that is a very urgent problem. It's exactly the opposite than in the financial system. We need to solve or to tackle that very rapidly. And we need to spend on that. Now, what is the government proposing? Since we have a lot of infrastructure and a lot of excess of residential construction, let us do some more. Let us put more money into infrastructure and residential construction. I don't think that is the best way to do it, but that probably will be the way that we will do it. And finally, let me make another point that is a very general point. If I look into the long term, okay, because I don't think that the world is going to end now, due to this crisis, okay, in 20 years' time, which is the problem, or where will Spain be? And I think that I can try to answer that first, stating that, in my opinion, the problem in the world in 20 years' time is not the financial crisis. I don't know if it is productivity. It is population. We are going to have 8 or 9 billion people, but with one different thing, and that is that traveling will be very cheap and people will travel very easy. So people will move from one place to another, taking advantage of almost any opportunity possible. And that will present an enormous problem for policy in the world. And Spain, I think, is going to be in the eye of the storm of that problem, basically because we are a country that is labor-intensive. Our model is labor-intensive. We are very open, and we have been very open to immigration. 4.5 million immigrants in 7 years have not created a serious problem in Spanish society, and that is to be very open to immigration. And therefore, I think that Spain is going to be very much at the center of that policy problem in the world. And that's it. Okay.
Thank you for covering such an amazing amount of ground so succinctly. Are there questions? Yeah.
I guess I have one question. Given the OECD suggests that Spanish unit labour costs have risen by around 30% since 2000 relative to the Eurozone average, and by somewhat more relative to Spain's export prices, is the continuation of a relatively high inflation environment actually consistent with the euro, or is the euro going to force unemployment to keep rising until Spanish wages deflate in the way that German wages deflated in the late 90s?
We don't feel that we have a problem of labor costs in this country, okay? Whatever the OECD says. For me, it's a puzzle that I have to say that I find difficult to understand, and that is how, when we have a common currency and a common monetary policy, how can we maintain year after year a higher inflation rate? But we do. I don't think that the inflation rate will come through increases in wages, or that we have a deflation if wages go down. I think that we have an unemployment system and we have a rigidity in the labor market that doesn't create that type of benign or situation. I think that what we will have is a quantity adjustment. That means unemployment will go to 15-16%, but with the type of unemployment benefit that we have, that will not create a downward pressure on wages. Whether that type of unemployment benefit is sustainable in the future or in the medium term, that is another question.
Michael.
I just want to play with your excellent sailing metaphor for a moment.
I have been here 2 days, and you talk a bit too fast for me. So if it's slow, I will be able to understand.
He talks too fast for many people.
Yes. I was just saying that I liked your sailing metaphor very much, and I just would like to play with it.
Okay.
I disagree about the keel. I think there was a lot of regulation. I completely agree with you about the sail. There's even more leverage. But one thing that your boat left out were sailors. And I want to ask a question that links your talk to what preceded. We talk about more regulation, but also more supervision. As you look at Spain and as you look at Europe, and in your former role as investment banker and as a civil servant, I would like to ask you, do you think Europeans and Americans will get a better return on their investment by investing more in regulation or investing more in supervision?
Wow. Well, I think that Europeans will not get a return for investing more in regulation. Americans will get a return for investing more in regulation. And with respect to supervision, I don't know enough. Maybe José Luis knows much more than I do. In Spain, I think that the supervision system has worked fairly well, and I don't think that we need more supervision. But because it has worked, not for any other reason. But José Luis, I don't know if you want to tackle that question. No?
It's true that our system has worked very well, and as you said before, and I completely agree, and the Bank of Spain has done a very good job in regulation, and the regulation they have proposed, and in supervision, which is tighter, but is also accepted by without a problem by the banks. So I think that if you have to invest in both things, in regulation and also in supervision. And I'm sure that things will go more or less in this direction, because in this crisis, the Spanish bank and the Spanish financial system has fared much better than those of other countries. And this is because, in my view, of the regulation and supervision of the Bank of Spain.
Max, and would you introduce yourself, please, since you recently arrived?
Max Berger with Apex. I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday and I just dropped in this morning. On this metaphor with sailing, could it be that Spain has the better sailors, meaning better bankers? Because, I mean, if you look at, where the banks in Spain are today, and especially when you look at the market cap chart you showed, it didn't look like this a year ago, and today the Spanish banks are, one of the very solid ones in Europe. And don't you want to give some attribute to the bankers?
Well, we are in a conference sponsored by Bankinter, so Spanish bankers are absolutely great, okay? But if you ask me, I think that the Bank of Spain had an enormous influence in the behavior of our bankers towards the type of crisis that we see in the US. Our bankers made a mistake, and that is that we had been giving mortgages at 100% of the value of the house with a very thin margin for 3 or 4 years. That is their mistake, but that is a business mistake. Okay, they didn't make the derivatives leverage mistake, and that I think that is due to the Bank of Spain. That is my opinion. I may be wrong.
Extrapolating Max's question, if you've got great sound banks, you've got a great place to live, and people trust you, does that provide a recipe for the future where Spain could potentially transition to becoming an asset management center going forward?
Well, we have most of the large investment banks and private banks already here. Here, UBS has a large operation, Credit Suisse, the French, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs. So everybody's here already.
If I can elaborate, I mean, specifically at the expense of London, the weather is bad there. It's a little bit expensive. The banks are bankrupt. You got good weather, good bankers, and seems like a good central bank. Sounds to me like you're off to the races.
Maybe. Well, but there is a contradiction a potential contradiction in the sense that Spain is a good place to live, and therefore people are going to come here to live. I doubt, or I don't know if Spain will continue to be a good place to live. Okay, so, but anyway, Spanish bank have a good asset management business already. Will we grow larger? Maybe, but I think that as I said, the large Swiss banks have a very important presence here.
Dali, did you have a comment?
I have a question. I'm struck by your argument that the next 10 years would be pretty much like the past 10 in many ways. And in that sense, actually, so sort of the central theme of the conference is about the next generation capitalism. But you seem to be saying Spain is already there in certain ways. So sort of what are the lessons for the general theme from the Spanish example in terms of this next generation capitalism, this new global or whatever global system that we are entering into?
Okay. Well, I don't know how is going to be the next generation capitalism. I don't think that we can affect very much how is it going to be. It will be. It will change, but as we were discussing, I think it's an endogenous thing much more than an exogenous process, okay? So I don't know. What I think is that Spain has a model. The model works pretty well. We are going to have now a downturn of 2 or 3 or 4 years, particularly in the real estate sector. But I don't think that we are going to, in Spain, that we are going to change the model substantially. It will be probably serviced in some new ways. People like the companies that we have seen here will create new things to offer to the people that are going to be in Spain. But I don't think that the Spanish model will change a lot, because I think it's quite competitive. It reflects quite well the competitive advantage of this country. So if that changes, it will change. But I don't know how will it change, certainly.
Thank you. That's